since the outbreak of the COVID-19, right? So the narratives has changed a lot about the BRI. So I wonder, so what's your take on the China's soft power in the time of COVID-19? Has it changed a lot? And as well as the narrative of China, as well as the BRI, are they connected or are they not really connected?
I think that there are not so much debates or discussions about this question you just mentioned, because pandemic is people are talking pandemic with some other aspects less than BI. But one issue actually strengthened the Chinese position is infrastructure building. You know, in the Suez River Canal, one of the big container ship was stranded, and then the demand for the Trans-Euro-Asia train is getting very high. Actually, you know that this China, between Europe and China, there are some train routes. I think there is a regular routes from Madrid to China, EU, and also from London to China. So those infrastructure, they are not perfect, but they are actually in high demand. They work very well. So in that sense, that might notice that, but I haven't followed about the soft power aspects. I don't know whether Adam and Daniel, do you have any observation on the soft aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of is going both ways. I think that China is able to leverage its networks across the BRI to share aid, medical aid, vaccines. You know, when the outbreak got really bad in Italy, China was like the #1 supporter of like sending doctors and nurses and resources. So I think it's able to use those pre-established networks in really important ways. I mean, I do think in a place like Canada, there's been a rise in anti-China sentiment in the context of COVID, but I don't think it has so much to do with COVID as political actors using COVID as an excuse to kind of leverage certain political viewpoints. And, you know, often try and like set up this dichotomy again of like kind of China versus the West, when that's not actually, if we look at materially what's going on, that's not actually how capital flows, how power flows, you know, what's actually happening. But I do think that it is an ideological discourse that I'm seeing more and more of, at least in like, you know, Western media, mainstream media, in a place like Canada.
The Chinese, I think, invested a lot in soft power through the Belt and Road Initiative. Remember, in Joseph Nye's kind of article, the idea of soft power was to get a country, another country, to change its policies or accommodate your interests without having to resort to force. So the idea was that cultural soft power that was very important for a country who was ascendant. Now, this is a very interesting thing because China was seen by Western media as a good example of poverty eradication. But then about 5 years ago, just after the Belt and Road was launched, there was a sea change in Western media and in American politics that China was a kind of rogue nation, cheater, and a competitor to the United States. And the Americans believed that this strategic competitor had to be contained, or if not brought to its knees. So this sea change is quite interesting because news about the BRI has, in large measure, coverage has diminished. So when I was in Ethiopia, you would have a very different view of China, warts and all, with Ethiopia or African countries and their relationship to BRI, which was seen as a form of soft power, clearly, of coming to the assistance of a developing country. So I think the soft power has gone up and down in the pandemic. I think it went up when China was sending medical equipment to European countries. I think it seemed to have went up when it successfully crushed coronavirus in Wuhan. It went down, I think, under the attacks of American policy experts and the Republican and Democratic parties and Trump. I think it is now kind of somewhere neither in a high point or particularly low point because of its support for working with the WHO. And of course, it is one of the suppliers to the world of the coronavirus. The Chinese have 2 firms making the vaccine. So I think China's perception of China has changed quite dramatically for other reasons as well in terms of human rights in the West. But how China is viewed in Pakistan or in Kenya or in Tanzania, it might be very different than how we view China in the West through Western media.
I mean, I think that's a really good point. I just want to add one thing really quick. Yeah, I think the reason that you see, like, even, you know, it's tempting to reduce this to like the Trump administration, but Biden gave a big speech yesterday, like 100 days into his presidency. And if you look at the transcript, it's very much like, we have to win the next century. We have to be the best. There's pressure coming from China. We have to defeat China and be the global like hegemon. And Biden's really doubling down on that. And I think it reflects what both of you were saying, that I mean, the perception of China is quite positive in a lot of developing countries. And the more positive it gets, I think the more you're seeing this push from people in places like the United States to create this kind of false narrative of like China versus a place like the US. When again, if we look at it economically, there's a deep, deep intertwining of these countries. And it's not this like 2 forces kind of clashing. It's a very manipulative kind of like way of setting up the narrative.
So the Alvin's question also touched on a very important aspect, that is who is controlling and who is the machinery and who is the tool of portraying or defining and framing soft power. China, at one time, China can be framed as a good developed model, another time is a monster. So today is a demonization of China is everywhere. Don't forget that Xinjiang's case was demonized, even though a lot of criticism we can have towards Chinese politics, towards Chinese policy in that region. But for demonization, I think that's too much. And also don't forget, 2003, I remember Saddam Hussein was demonized as having mass weapons of mass destruction. So when the West is interested in demonize something, and someone will suffer. So this is again having your question regarding soft power, is that the English-speaking world controls the machines, the propaganda machines, the news, the framing language. So here we should also see this. These aspects are very important as well. I fully support Adam's point as well.
So speaking of the media discourse, right? So recently, the idea of Indo-Pacific, open Indo-Pacific, has become very, very popular in the West, as well as the Blue Dot Initiative, led by the United States, Japan, and Australia. And recently, Australia also withdrew from the BRI. So I wonder, do you think that the Blue Dot Initiative that aims to provide assessment and certifications of infrastructure project, it's actually an alternative, actually it's a counter initiative to China's BRI? And also, what do you think about the open Indo-Pacific?
I mean, I think it's an attempt to create a counterweight, but I mean, let's look at the state of infrastructure in the United States. Is the United States really in a position to kind of like be offering the gold standard of what good infrastructure is? If you look at the infrastructure that they build in the US has some of the worst infrastructure in the world for any global North country. It's like, it's horrendous. Have you spent any time, in New York City? the subway stations are about to fall apart, you know? So I think it's largely a political maneuver, to be honest, but I'd love to hear what the rest of you.
Well, it's very interesting about Australia saying it quit, which is not accurate. It is the Belt and Road projects negotiated with the Victoria government are cancelled, but not with not with the private sector. So Australia is not exactly 100% out of the have cut all ties with China. I think that would be self-defeating. But realistically, China has this 40 years of experience. It has trillions of dollars. And I don't think that realistically, United States and Japan, basically, who are not always on the best of terms for historical reasons, are going to be able to match China's infrastructural strategy. I don't think they have the resources, nor the leadership, nor they do have, of course, the technology, but they have other objectives. I don't think that's the main thing. I think the main problem will be next year, where debt stress among countries in Africa and in Asia, which had their economies devastated by the collapse of the economies as a result of the coronavirus, that will be a much bigger problem that the world community faces. It has to address the deep recession that is affecting many countries. And so far, we have not seen an adequate collective response to both the economic and health side of the pandemic. So that's what really is at the top of the agenda.
Yes, I basically agree with Daniel, and I do not think that it will be a counter what is called project. But if you look at Biden's new initiative in this $1 trillion of infrastructure initiative, many people are shocked that it actually resembles the Chinese way of doing things. It's kind of a state mobilization, the whole, ask the Congress, senators to support, and it's like a national project. This is not the United States. I think in my memory, United States is private-based country and never a kind of state-oriented. But now actually they begin to learn the Chinese way of doing things. So a lot of ironies in here.
Professor Lee, I did write some notes about convergence between China's idea of the pivotal role infrastructure plays in a country's economic performance and raising the standard of living for working people, and Biden's, in fact, and both accepting high levels of debt, right? We've had a lot of discussion in the past 5 years about debt stress, and here is the United States, which has taken on huge amounts of debt as its response to the crisis and to save its economy and to ensure a recovery. So strangely, there is a convergence here. It just might be one of the serendipity that United States macroeconomic policy and Chinese macroeconomic policy superficially resembles each other, superficially.